as forms of matter, and I include them here because of the interest it might have for you. Sound is matter, fitness, fineness is matter, grossness, shape, division, darkness, image, warm light like the sunshine, and cool light like moonlight, and even shadow. Very interesting that shadow is regarded as fine elements of matter. Another unique view regarding the role of matter in Jainism is that it adheres to the soul and can become seeds of karma. The subtle particles of matter which become transformed into karma particles hinder and limit the functions of the soul. The question how a soul originally becomes associated with karma is a fundamental one, as we already have heard. The question of time, we have had already a few points regarding the question of time, so I can skip on to this point about the original cause of the association between soul and matter. This was the question I asked Swamiji, to which I had no answer, but I think it is a question we should ask, knowing that we cannot find a satisfactory answer in the Indian tradition. Why don't you give up the Indian tradition in that case? I thought about that, but there have been some masterminds, not only in Jainism, in Buddhism and in Hinduism, Dignaga, Dharma, Kirti, Shankara, can name a galaxy of such persons. They have not questioned the workability of the karma theory. So until I have a different insight, I will go along with them and keep it at that. And from the Jaina position, it is a form of matter that is there in the soul, and the question is not where did it all start from. I have it, what can I do with it in order to be able to do without it? I want to come to the term dravya, which I already said is what jiva and ajiva are called. To say that they are dravyas, substances, is not the end of the story. In Jainism, when you talk about dravya, you have to consider the terms guna and paryaya. For anyone who has done a smattering of Indian philosophy, dravya and guna will be familiar, but what about paryaya? I'm talking about substance, quality, mode, or modification. So both, remember, both jiva and ajiva are dravyas. So both have gunas and paryayas. Let's start with ajiva dravya because that's easier. I'm going to come back to jiva dravya and the guna and paryaya that belong to it. Let's take substance, gold or earth or clay, let's say clay. Gold and clay. When we say they are dravyas, we cannot actually see gold or clay, but only manifestations of gold and clay. That means that dravya as a concept itself is an abstract term which you go to on the basis of the mode of a particular substance. You can have similar modes. You can have a pot of gold, but a pot made of gold and a pot made of clay. That means the paryayas are the same, the modes are the same, but the dravyas are different. Would you like a pot made of gold, or would you like a pot made of clay? It means that gold and clay have similar qualities which make it possible for them to be made into a pot or a bangle in the case of gold, or earrings. And that means that the relation between substance and quality is of a different kind as between modification and substance. You cannot know a thing without its modification. I cannot know that this is made out of gold if I do not see it. I must see a ring in order to say that it is of gold. I cannot see gold. Gold is the abstract category that I have in my head. And I can, as a Soni, identify it as something gold. That means guna and paryaya together, so quality and modification, play a role in the manifestation of the substance. And there was a big debate about the relation between these two principles in accounting for change. So a modification can change. You can make a ring out of gold. You can change the ring into earring. So the ring is destroyed, so to say, out of which you make the earring. And the goldness is not lost. It means the substanceness is retained despite the destruction of a particular mode or modification, because these qualities which allow them to be changed are there in the substance itself, as part of the substance itself. So the problems that emerge regarding dravya, guna, paryaya, substance, quality and mode, whether guna, the quality, and paryaya are synonymous and therefore in fact refer to the same unitary principle of change as Siddhasena Divakara did, because for him in the canon you only have dravyartikanaya and paryartikanaya, no gunartikanaya. Why? I don't know. Maybe he relies very much on the canon itself. The other question was whether they are distinct and together constitute the principle of change, in which guna is described as an internal attribute of a dravya and paryaya as its external attribute, as for example Kunda Kunda does, Umaswati, Pujapada and Vidyanandin Akalanka also. There was also the question later whether the relation between guna and paryaya, so quality and modification of a dravya, should be seen as both identical and different at the same time in order to explain the occurrence of change in a dravya. But these are very specific questions. Okay, so we have the basic principle of what dravya, guna, and paryaya mean and how they belong to the concept of dravya. Where do these terms come from? Don't be intimidated here, I'm only going to use the green that is shown here. Dravya and guna. These are the Vaisheshika categories. And we know that Jainism and Vaisheshika ideas in many respects have similarities in them. Here, in the case of dravya, guna, and paryaya, we have just two aspects that we can trace back in other systems. Where does paryaya come from? This, for me, is the Jaina contribution to the history of the development of philosophical ideas in the Indian tradition. From what I have said about paryaya, I hope, so before I understood this, I wouldn't have been able to explain how ring can be changed to earring without gold losing its goldness. You can just say the qualities are there, that it can be changed, but one step is missing if you don't have paryaya, if you don't say explicitly that out of these substances, these products can be made. The substance itself as a concept you cannot see, but gold objects you can. Is it somehow a transformation of the word karma that led them to the idea of using the word paryaya? The dictionary meaning of paryaya might be useful here. So it comes from pari, the prefix pari, and the root eti, so that paryeti is what you will have, and paryaya is derived from this word. And the dictionary meaning specifically related to Jainism is the regular development of a thing and the end of this development. Because pari and eti together means to go about, to move in a circle, and from there you come to the idea of a modification. So you have the substance and it is made into a certain object. So this is paryaya. And I think it is obviously an advancement and one of the philosophical contributions to the Indian philosophical tradition, and particularly in the context of dravya, guna, and paryaya. So the basic point is that in characterizing a thing, one has to grant that if it can change its form, then its substantiality is not in any way diminished, since what it changes into is also described as a substance essentially identical with the original substance. So, let's plunge into a selected number of quotations from texts in 5 minutes. Kunda Kunda says substances comprise jiva, and a jiva. Jiva, he says, is constituted of sentiency and manifestation of consciousness. This manifestation of consciousness is called upayoga, a technical term which will help me later when I have some time on another occasion to discuss the question of the emergence of paryaya in jiva. It was easy to understand it in terms of substance as ajiva, so gold and clay. But what about jiva, which also must have guna and paryaya? These are the gunas, chetana, sentiency, and manifestation of consciousness.
Dr. Soni, if you would like to have some questions, I think we should slowly
okay.
wind up.
Yeah.
There's
Fine.
only 50 minutes left. You can
Yeah.
maybe find your last words.
So that's it. I can sum up very quickly and say that the Jains are very consistent in applying the concept of dravya, guna and paryaya not only to things but to beings as well, and that makes up the law of beings and things. Thank you very much.
Please raise your hand.
I was thinking of the Parinamavada because the modification, the idea of modification comes to me. I don't know whether they also took it from the Jainas in that sense. If you look at it, the Vedanta also has got this transformation of the Brahman into the world, and they invoke this modification or modified states, and I'm wondering whether they freely borrow from this kind of modification. But
yeah, I think it depends in what sense you mean modification. For
it's
example,
material modification of Brahman into the world substance. And they use the same gold example. They say as gold is made into various Brahman doesn't lose its essential nature, but exists in the state of the world and exists as Brahman, pure, untouched.
Yeah, in that case they only have one. So Brahman and Atman, they are, depending on whose position you take, they are identical. But here we have two separate categories. So like Purusha and Prakriti, they are both dravyas.
Correct.
So by definition they are identical. By definition they are two separate entities altogether, without one having the nature of the other. If you have just one principle, then there's no problem.
Thank you, sir. Again, the same question is that soul is that pure entity, and when that is the karma, it is the pudgala, it is the matter. And soul itself, the pure soul, is nothing to do. Then again the question is how it attracts the karma, the pudgala. Anyway, the second thing is that in case of paryaya, that paryaya is there are three parts of paryaya. That is origination, and the cessation, and of course the existence. So three, actually it is going on simultaneously at the same time. So that is why that paryaya we say that the original thing is the same. Suppose a person, it is from childhood to the old age.
Yes.
That Jayendra Soni is Jayendra Soni. So that is the identity. But the change due to the paryaya, due to the origination, cessation, and the existence. Yeah.
We said it's upayoga. Actually, you have to use the term upayoga here to refer to paryaya of jiva.
Yeah.
And upayoga is not only jnanopayoga, but darshanopayogas. So you have two kinds, and that's another big field.
Yeah.
Which one takes place first? Do they follow one after the other? What about a kevalin? When does it, what happens in the case of a kevalin? Which pariyaya takes place? And the question of darshana, jnanopayoga, also as a manifestation of the soul, can also have error in it. But I'm not sure whether I answered your question.
So my question was that Utpada, Vyaya and Drogya, their origination, cessation and the stability. The
Yeah.
three are simultaneously it is happening there.
Yes.
So that is why pariyaya.
Yeah.
And that is why the identity is the same. But mode changes is something we are seeing the changes.
So by analogy, it would be just as the substance gold changes from ring to ring and earring and so on. In Jiva, you have the change from darshana to dhyana and so on,
Yes,
here and there, without Jiva losing its Jivatva, without goldness losing its goldness, in the case of gold objects.
Was there any answer for that? When the soul and matter came together?
I asked Swami. That was my question, yeah.
That is why they give the example of golden nuggets. When the gold was associated with the ore, no, we know the ore has goldness and we separate the gold from the ore. Like that, Jiva should be liberated from the matter. That is. For this, Buddha gives a beautiful example. When there is an arrow thrown on your body, better you get the arrow removed first. Don't go on asking who made this arrow, who threw this arrow, who shot this arrow towards me, and all those questions are useless. The useful thing is to remove the arrow first. So don't go on questioning it. Buddha says it comes there. Huh?
Take action.
The Sadravya Lakshanam, the sutra says. Sat is the basic thing. Sat existence is important. What exists has these categories.
Yeah.
Utpada Vyaya Dhruvya Yuktam Sat.
This is what I said.
Yeah.
There were major thinkers in the Indian tradition who have accepted the theory of karma, and until we find another explanation, let's go along with them.
Yeah. Upayoga is Chetana.
Yeah, that's...
that Upayoga, somewhere I have read it, Upayoga is translated as harmic energy. Harmic is a psychological term. We don't find in a common
this is
dictionary.
related to other aspects in Indian philosophy, Savikalpaka Pratyaksha and
Nirvikalpa
Pratyaksha. Because the text says it is Sakara and Anakara.
Take this.
We have another question there, Nikhil?
Okay. What I have to ask is something related to what he has just pointed out from Buddhism.
Yes.
And first of all, I'm very glad that, sir, you have admitted that very primordial question as to the fundamental cause of all these burdening of the soul with karma. That could not be answered. That could be, if at all, that could be answered. That could be answered only existentially. There is such an implication from the very first person point of view and everything. And comparing existential phenomenology and Jainism or Buddhism for that matter as a school of philosophy or as a philosophical system as such, I find a certain kind of contradiction between these two approaches, or two diametrically opposite approaches when it comes to treating philosophy. Like when it comes to existential phenomenology, they do not dare to take any particular stance on ethics. Whereas when it comes to Jainism or Buddhism, they dare to take a clear-cut stance on ethics, but metaphysics has been brought in, wantedly or unwantedly, and a grand edifice of metaphysics in the case of Jainism or in the case of Buddhism, they have created. But when we look from the modern scientific point of view, we can simply rubbish it in a certain sense. But still, whenever an ethical stance has to be clarified or substantiated, they are in a position to resort to these, what we say, childish metaphysical positions.
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of existential phenomenology, they go for metaphysics, but in a unique way.
I think this is part of the Indian tradition, because there is such a thing called Indian ethics, and in the case of the Jainas, I think it is part of, as an offshoot of the ascetic tradition.
Yeah, my question is, why is that so, sir? Why should they resort to metaphysics or ontology as such, when
I think
the teaching is primarily ethical?
No, if you want to give it a philosophical basis, then you can say, for example, through acts of violence, the amount of particles that you lead to an inflow into you is, in terms of quantity, a lot. Which means if you agree that karma has to be deleted, then you start with reducing the inflow of matter first. Why should you do that? Because theoretically, if I perform acts of violence, I will be getting a lot of karma. So let me start there at least. And that is rationally appealing, because you have an explanation, not a belief.
That's the problem, exactly.
No, please, we have 3 more questions and we have only 3 minutes left.
Are they
So I
all
would
metaphoric?
request now
This is the point.
No, please,
Are
sir.
they
Hello?
all metaphoric?
Hello? No. I must stop you now. I would suggest we gather the last 3 questions. There's Nikhil, the gentleman here, and Sundar together, and then have a collective answer for 3 of them. Okay? And please be very brief.
Thank you, Jay. Just very quick question to the Pariyaya, the fact that you don't see it from Vaiseshika. The Visesha category of Vaiseshika, which is about the particulars or individuation, will give you one attempt, Visesha, yeah, the particular and the mode of individuation, will give you one access to understanding the specificity of how the substance is formed into what. So I think the real way to look for the Pariyaya is probably through Visesha, and then later on Abhava, because of the cessation, origin, etc.
Yes.
And just one final point, and then we'll come back. And the point about the soul and the karman, I see the point. The real interesting thing for me is the problem of defining what is action. If you look at karma not as matter but as action, a soul which does not act will never accumulate karma. It's actually not about the larger metaphysics of matter, etc. It's just about the fact that the capacity of a soul to act or not act. So if you look at karma as a possibility of action, that relationship is very obvious to me. In the sense how I make sense of it. So the more the soul acts, the more problem it can eventually get into.
Yeah.
If it doesn't act, it's in a sense a liberated soul.
But the material aspect of karma will not be involved there. And here, in terms of Visheshas, in Vaisheshika, it's clearly one of the relations that takes place between an object and its present, and the way one can talk about it. So Samanya is not a category on its own. It is used as something related to Dravya and Guna, in order to say that cowness is in this cow, and not that this gold can be changed into ring or earring. Perhaps.
I suppose it's not a question you might want to ask answered directly, but just your opinion. Since it's given its origins in this very ethical sort of position in Jainism, do you think that that soteriological impulse remained central throughout the history of Jainism, or it got scattered in different ways, or do you think it retained its centrality? Just your opinion.
I think it's